If you're watching this video, there's a good chance that it's because someone sent it to you in order to be passive aggressive because they want you to look after their plants, but they don't want to go through the process of explaining to you in minute detail exactly what to do with each plant. But nevertheless, I'm here to stand in the gap, to communicate on their behalf, and to take you through the steps that you need to consider in order to keep their plants alive whilst they're gone. First of all, I thank you for your service, because without people like you, people like us who like plants are not able to necessarily do all the things that we want, which might include travel, visiting someone else, or helping out other people who are in need of our assistance in order that we need to leave for a certain amount of time. So first and foremost, thank you very much. But in order to give you the best chance of success, you need some training. And that's what I'm here to do today. This video is aimed at people who are not plant people, probably don't own plants or not good at keeping them alive, but want to do the very best when they have been given the task to keep those plants alive. I'm going to break it down and make it as simple as I can, and break it into some 5 steps that hopefully will give you the best chance of success. If you find this video at all useful, then make sure you give it a like. And if you are one of the people who need someone to look after their plants, then feel free to pass this on to someone else so that they get the message. There are really 5 main areas I want to touch on. The first 2 apply to before you get the plants or look after them, and the next 3 are those that apply whilst you are actually looking after them. Number 1 is listen to instruction. And by that I mean listen to what someone has said about the plants, about how you need to look after them, what you need to check for, and follow those steps. If necessary, write them down. But what can go wrong is if someone says, water my plants once a week, once every 3 days, and you are kind of fudging it and maybe doing it once every 4 days, once every 10 days, whatever, as fits with your schedule. That can cause problems, not only for the plants, but also for the relationship, which we'll touch on later on. But what's important is that person knows the plants better than you. So it's best for you to follow someone who has more experience in that realm with these specific plants. So listen to the instructions that were given to you. Now, some people will give very basic and loose instructions. So maybe like water this once a week, and they keep it relatively loose or vague. And that's fine. If that's what they're comfortable with and that's all they do to keep their own plants alive, then there's not much you can do. But I would also urge you to try and get as much information as possible to give you the best chance of success. A bonus tip on this one is if you're not sure about how often to water, or you've forgotten, or you can't quite remember for this particular plant, if you watered it today or yesterday, etc., I would err on the side of not watering it, or watering it less or less frequently, because just like if you're cooking and you're adding salt, if you have undersalted your food, you can add salt, but if you've oversalted it, you can't extract the salt back out. It's the same thing if you've put too much water, or you've watered the plant too frequently, you cannot now unwater the plant. The plant's already taken the water. But if you haven't watered it enough, you can always add more or make it more frequent going forward. Building on my previous point number 2, ask additional questions on top of the instructions that they've given to you. Most people will give you instructions that they think are relevant, helpful, and they come to the top of their mind. But there are things that they may forget, and there may be things that they take for granted, as they take as a given. But it's important for you, especially if you have no experience with plants, in order to ask as many questions as possible so that things are as clear as they possibly could be. For example, someone might say, when this plant the soil looks dry, water it. But what looks dry to one person may not look dry to another person. You also may not have seen the soil both dry and wet, so you may not be able to compare. So things like that may be gray areas in terms of interpretation. So ask clarifying questions so you know exactly what to do. Building off that, some people will maybe use terms that you don't recognize. So someone may say, "Oh, just do the finger test," or use a moisture meter, and things like that. If you're not familiar with plants, you may have no idea what that means. So don't just ignore it. Maybe ask follow-up questions to actually understand what's being requested or required of you. Because in order for you to do the best job you possibly can, you need to understand all the information that's available to you. Some examples of things that you may not have thought to ask that may be relevant might be, is it okay if I move this plant? Is it very sensitive to being moved around? Must it be right by the window, or can it be moved slightly out of the way? Things like, Is it toxic to pets? Or does it cause irritation to the skin? Should I only handle this when I'm wearing gloves? What else? Does this plant need to be fertilized whilst you're gone? Maybe something even as specific as how often and how much water do you give to this particular plant, that particular plant, or maybe more holistically, can you show me your watering routine? Especially if you can step through it with them, that will probably give you the best chance of being able to mirror it and replicate it yourself, because you've seen exactly what they do, what they look for, and they break it down for you. And finally, the most important question to ask, I think, is what should I do if I see blank? So it might be if I see one of the plants seems to be dying, the leaves are drooping, if it's going yellow, if it's going brown. All those kinds of case-by-case, scenario-based decisions you have to make. Those are questions that are really worth asking, because the way you handle the problem might not be the same way that they handled it. And for the best chance of success here, you probably want to mirror what that person would do rather than maybe what your natural instinct might be. An example might be these here, these are my strawberries, and if you were looking after them and you saw them in this state, you might think, panic, 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 why are there so many dying brown leaves? There's also a bit of mold in here, why is it moldy? And then you might want to start doing all sorts of things in order to try and take care of that. However, I know, as someone who's been trying to keep these alive and trying to get them to do something for all upwards of about 6 months, I know that this is pretty normal, and the dying leaves, I just take them out, the mold, I kind of just leave it, and I already know what goes on with this plant, so this would not stress me out anyway. But maybe if it were a different one of my plants, if there was a brown leaf, I know that's abnormal. So I know, okay, that means I need to do something and change up how I'm looking after this plant. So the point is, ask as many questions as you can in order to cover as many bases and to make things as clear as possible. Point number 3 is to try and maintain the environment that the plants are in. By that I mean, if you are staying at that person's house or their flat or whatever, and you are living there whilst looking after the plants or coming in and out, then you might want to do things in order to try and maintain the environment to be similar to when that person is living there full time. So, for example, if that person normally, maybe let's say they work from home, they keep the blinds open for the majority of the day, and they have plants on the windowsill, then that is something that you maybe want to try and replicate if you're staying there. As opposed to staying there and but you in your own house like to keep the blinds shut a lot, that may damage some of the plants, or they may suffer because they don't have enough sunlight. So it's important to ask questions and understand what is the routine and what is the environment like. Even things like temperature may make a difference, something that you may not consider. Someone else's flat may to you feel really hot, so you don't turn on the heating, you leave the windows open, but compared to how they normally have it, it's actually very cold, and that may affect some of the plants, and the plants may suffer, especially if you leave the window open. That might attract pests. There may be all sorts of additional things that you may not think about if you just open the window as you normally would. That can cause problems with the plants, so it's important to also establish the rules around that. On the flip side, if that person is bringing their plants over to your space, then try and do your best to replicate the environment that those plants were in before they came to you. So, for example, there are certain plants that sit normally really close to the window, some that sit back, some need certain temperatures and whatnot. Try your best to try and arrange the plants in a way that mirrors or gets as close as possible to the environment that they're in. And that's something you should be able to coordinate with the person you're looking after the plants for to find out what the best solution is. Of course, if they're coming to your environment, and even if you're in their environment, you're probably not going to be able to match it one for one. So what's also important is to think about how the differences may affect the way you should look after the plants. If normally the environment that you were in, or the plants were in before, is a certain temperature, and then when you're there it's actually warmer, then it's probably likely you may have to water more frequently, or water with more, like a bigger amount of water per pot. So those are adjustments and amendments you should make, but also discuss with the person you're looking after the plants with to see how they think is the best way to, what the best way to handle this is. Number 4, and potentially the most important part of this whole thing, pay attention. And by that I mean specifically pay attention to any changes that you see. It might be a good idea to take a picture of all the plants when you first move in or start looking after them, and then you have a frame of reference to compare to see if things have changed. For example, on this plant here, most of the leaves at this point Most of them are kind of bleached and a very pale green or yellow, but there are some that are kind of a more verdant green. But if you walked in on this after like day 3 and you couldn't quite remember if that leaf used to look like that, but was it like that before? Is that new? What's happening? You may not know exactly what's gone wrong, and therefore you may not be able to step in where something's necessary for intervention because you didn't know that that was a sign of distress. So it's useful for you to have a record to refer to. Some specific things that you may want to pay attention to might be if the leaves have started to go very pale, if they turn yellow, if they start to turn brown, if leaves are dropping, if the leaves start drooping, if you notice pests, so like what may appear to just be like flies or small insects in the pot, flying around the pot, etc. All of those changes, not necessarily things happening, but they're changes to compared to where you were when you first started to look after them. Those are important things to look out for. So generally pay attention, and I think, speaking from the perspective of the plant owner, I would appreciate someone who is attentive to see that there's a difference between in the last 5 days this thing has happened, and then maybe let me know about it so that we can discuss what I need to do. Okay, so the fifth and the final and potentially the most important part of all of this is to make sure that you do things to preserve the relationship. The likelihood is whoever this person is that's asked you to look after their plants trusts you in some capacity, or maybe they just have no choice and you're like their last resort. But we're going to go with the former option. They probably trust you, and with that comes some responsibility. So I would say in order to preserve the relationship, there are a few things to consider. One would probably be to communicate, of course. Communicate and establish exactly what's going to happen, but also importantly, establish what method of communication you want to have whilst that person is away. Whether they want you to text them updates once a day, or they want you to just like video call them and just take them around, show them the plants, or maybe once a week, just highlight if anything has gone wrong, that kind of thing. Establish whatever method or frequency of communication that works best for you and try and honor that and stick to that. Of course, things may go wrong and you may not be able to communicate, but it's best to at least try. And speaking of things going wrong, another thing when it comes to communication is communicate as early as possible if something goes wrong. If something has gone wrong and you didn't say anything and you knew it went wrong, especially if it's going to deteriorate without any interaction or intervention, then that kind of, the blame lies with you on that, because you saw something, you didn't do anything, and something could have been done in order to save this, but you didn't do anything. So please, where possible, communicate as early as possible, especially if you notice something that is going wrong. And I think maybe a really important element of all of this is to be honest, and that honesty may come in the form of, no, unfortunately I cannot look after your plants for you. And that's okay, just be real. Don't say, yeah, I can do it, and you know yourself that you are going to be away for a week or 2 weeks in that, but the time the person's away, and then the plants die, and now problem. Just be honest, because it will help both you and the person in the long run, and hopefully it will help your relationship. And of course, the plants, the most important part of all of this. That's all the tips that I have. If you have any additional suggestions, points of information, questions to clarify, please leave a comment so that we can build up a nice repository, a place of reference for information for everybody who's tasked with looking after plants, and everyone has the best success they possibly could looking after somebody else's plants. If you have watched this video, looked after someone else's plants successfully, and you're feeling inspired and you want to start buying some plants of your own, then I am trying to compile together some different videos on different topics surrounding, I guess, the experience or period of first acquiring plants. And I'm putting together some information around that. So if you have specific questions, then let me know in the comments and I can integrate that into another video. But otherwise, on the end screen, I will leave the playlist that I'm putting together so you have that as a frame of reference. And finally, before we go, a song. So a song that has been on my mind recently is the song Walk by Griff. It's just a very fun pop song that I heard, I don't know, a couple of months ago, maybe. Yeah, I think a couple of months ago. It's nice, light pop. I think I first heard of Griff about a year and a bit ago. I think she won, or she was nominated for BBC Sounds, and the first song of hers that I liked a lot was, what was it called? I want to say Black. Oh, what is that song called? Black Hole. Yes, another great song. So I'd recommend you check out both of the songs. And that's all I have to say. A reminder, if you want to learn more about plants, looking after them, especially if you're a first-time plant owner, then make sure you check the playlist that's going to be over here. If you want to subscribe and figure out what else I'm going to do on the channel, because I'm not even sure myself, then make sure you subscribe over here and enjoy the rest of your day.